Kilham.
Oh, we got a picture. There we go. Hi, I started working with black bears about 20 years ago, and I came at it from rather an unusual angle. I graduated from the University of New Hampshire in 1974 with a bachelor's degree in wildlife, and had hoped to go on to graduate school to do the kind of work I'm doing today. But unfortunately, I'm dyslexic, and my grade scores and test scores were well below par, and I failed to get into graduate school. As a result, I went west to a trade school and learned the art of gunsmithing, and have employed myself as a custom gunsmith over the last 30 years. In 1982, we returned to New Hampshire. My wife, Debbie, who was in the crowd, we both met at Colt Firearms, and when I returned to New Hampshire, I still had it in my mind that I wanted to do the kind of work that I wanted to do. And I had a leg up on this because my father, Lawrence Kilham, who was a virologist at the Dartmouth Medical School, studied birds as an avocation. And so I grew up in a household with lots of wild animals around. When I was 2 years old, my dad went on sabbatical to Africa and brought a half-grown leopard into the house, much to my mother's chagrin. My sister Phoebe, who works with me with the bears, was 1 at the time, and my next oldest brother was 4. He woke up one night with a leopard at the end of his bed screaming. But needless to say, we all survived and came back from Africa with 2 African hornbills and a Nile crocodile, which my dad raised in a basement shower until it was about 6 feet long and the National Zoo came to pick it up. But since that time, when we moved to New Hampshire, we had all the native wildlife from foxes and skunks and beaver and woodpeckers and aviaries and crows and ravens. But when my time came along, I was interested in studying carnivores, and my dad had concentrated on birds. He and my mother would sit in front of woodpecker nests and document courtship and other behavior using a pair of binoculars and a small folding chair. But carnivores were a lot different prospect to study. They were a lot more difficult. For any of those of you who've been in the woods, you know that carnivores, you're lucky to get a glimpse of them as they disappear into the brush. So I thought, based on my childhood experience, if I could get a hold of an orphan animal, raise it loose in the forest, document its juvenile behavior, and use that as a leg up on understanding its adult behavior, I would have access to a very complicated animal to study. And I wasn't thinking about black bears at the time. I was thinking about a coyote or a bobcat or maybe a fisher, the large woodland weasel we have around here. Because black bears, when I started my study, for one, I thought they were too high profile. I thought I'd never have access to them. Second, they weren't rehabilitated in most of the New England states. And so my sister Phoebe and I became wildlife rehabilitators to access one of these animals that I was interested in. But at the end of 2 years, none of those animals came our way. But fortunately, a New Hampshire conservation officer broke departmental policy and brought us an 11-month-old black bear cub that he thought had been hit by a car. And it turned out that the cub had not been hit by a car. It had no infectious disease, but definitely had something wrong with it. It was shaky and it couldn't stay on a branch. We called it wobbly bear. And the bear was quickly confiscated from us because we lacked a permit to keep black bears. But later that spring, the director of Fish and Game gave us a call and said, would you take the bear back? It seemed that nobody wanted it. And I was interested in why it was wobbly, and ultimately we had to euthanize it, and we sent the brain out to the Wildlife Disease Lab in Wyoming and got a diagnosis of lysosomal storage disease, which is like Tay-Sachs disease in humans and caused by inbreeding. And this was the first documented case of this disease in a wild black bear population. But later that spring, I got a call from Frosty Hammond from Vermont Fish and Wildlife, and he had 2 orphan cubs. And he had heard about what I was interested in doing and asked me if I would be willing to take those cubs. And I said, sure, but there's a small issue with a permit. And I said, if you'll talk to New Hampshire Fish and Game, I'll be happy to reconsider and take the cubs. Well, the next morning I had a permit in hand, and since that time we've raised and rehabilitated over 100 black bear cubs and returned them to the wild. Last year alone, we had over 30 black bear cubs, and this was the result of 2011, which was an extraordinarily good food year, and all the female bears that could have cubs did have cubs, followed by 2012, which was a horrible food year. Started out with 70 and 80 degree temperatures in March, which changed the food cycle throughout the year, and left a lot of hungry mothers. Half of these cubs were the result of mothers being shot at chicken coops, something that's completely preventable with a nice hot electric fence with peanut butter on it. Bears check out all new smells with their tongue, and so they get experience very quickly and don't approach what's behind that fence. The work that I do is the study of behavior of black bears. And my approach to this is very different from the modern scientific method. I'm somebody who thinks in pictures and pays attention to detail, and I model my information as systems. So I model all the observations that I've made, first-hand observations, and I assemble them, and as they go together, they can only go together one way because I recognize they're a system. And my mind works that way, so I don't have to labor over this. Conventional schools were very difficult for me. Mathematics was almost impossible. Statistics was beyond my realm. But modeling in this fashion was very, very easy. It happens all the time. I can't stop doing it. And when I started doing this work, black bears were thought to be solitary animals. That is, the only interactions they had with their own kind were with their offspring and with their mates during the mating season. Unlike typically social animals like wolves and chimpanzees that live inside a territory and have all the resources they need inside that territory, and a hard hierarchy for allocating resources down through family members. Bears, on the other hand, the closest thing they have to a territory is a female home range, and the females do exclude other bears from that home range. These female home ranges are evenly spaced on the landscape. Their food supply, on the other hand, is the highest quality foods in the forest, and these are unevenly dispersed on the landscape. So at any given time, one female bear may have a huge surplus of food in her home range, and her immediate neighbor can have nothing. And this, over time, leads to sharing. And what I've discovered is that black bears are reciprocal altruists and share a common social behavior background with that parallels human behavior. The cubs that I worked with in this study were the very young cubs that came to me before they had any experience with their mother outside the den. These were the bottle feeders. I would take them for long walks into the forest and observe their very first reaction to their wild environment. Some of these bears I followed into adulthood. This is a bear named Squirty who came to me when she was 3 pounds. She's currently 18 years old and will be giving birth to her 10th set of cubs. She has not only been successful in establishing her own home range, but she's established what I call a matrilineal hierarchy. And that means that Squirty, who shares her home range with daughters and granddaughters, every time she sees one of her relatives, she will chase them. And so Squirty chases SQ2, currently her oldest daughter, an adult daughter SNLO, a younger daughter Brooke, another adult daughter 2, and the youngest subadult SQ2LO, who's the daughter to SQ2. It's linear because SQ2 chases everybody below her, SNLO chases everybody below her, and everybody chases SQ2LO. And the result of this is that Squirty has access to the highest quality foods in the greater home range. So in a marginal food year, it ensures that at least one of these females will have enough resources to reproduce. It also prevents the youngest one, if the home ranges are already filled by adult bears, of reproducing, because there'll be pressure on her all the time. So she might not get an opportunity to reproduce until she's 6 or 7 years old, unless one of these other bears disappears for some reason. And so this allows the bears to maintain populations based on their natural foods. In these home ranges, the young males are quickly chased off. In this series of pictures, Squirty is chasing one of her grandsons. I personally watched him get chased more than 30 times. He was the target of not only his grandmother, his mother, but his aunts and anybody else who could get a bead on him. By September of his second year, he left the greater home range and joined the population of bears in the Upper Valley. The large males that came into my study area came in during the breeding season. These were the 350 plus pound bears. These bears, 10 to 15% of the population do all the mating. But after they got done with the mating, they would stay and compete with the female and their cubs. But the females didn't take long not to tolerate this. In this series of pictures, Squirty, weighing about 175 pounds, is going after a 350-pound male and asking him to leave. I watched her daughter, who weighed only 135 pounds at the time, do a very stiff-legged walk, zigzagging in front of a big 350-pound male. He backed off into the bushes and acted like it was no big deal, but in the morning he was gone and he never returned. This is evidence of female choice in mating, because if there wasn't a repercussion, these big males would stay and compete with the females and their cubs in the female home ranges. The big surprise came when Squirty shared her innermost resources with the neighboring females who were unrelated to her. And when these neighboring females, all of which were a clan that were related to this matriarch, a bear we called Moose, who was 15 years Squirty's senior, when these bears came and shared Squirty's resources, there was no aggression towards them whatsoever. And this suggested that there was reciprocity taking place, and that these bears were indeed valuable to Squirty, because if they weren't, she could just easily chase them off. And here was another parallel to human behavior. Not only was cost counting taking place, she was judging whether this bear had value to her or not, something that we do every day, all day long, with our friends, relatives, and in our economic dealings that we do. But Squirty showed aggression towards her family members and not towards strangers, and that's something that's very human as well. We would never go up and accost a stranger the same way we would verbally abuse our family members. And the reason is that our family members are our closest cooperators, and it's terribly important that we communicate with them honestly. And we can, because we can reconcile. But if we went up to a stranger and treated them the same way, they're still a cooperator, but we might not be able to reconcile. So we behave ourselves around strangers. And this parallel is what really made me realize that the bears had something that no other animal has been identified with in the non-human animal kingdom. This is something they've been looking for in the great apes for years and haven't found. And bears have all the cognitive abilities that go along with this type of behavior. The male bears brought up another problem, and they were much more difficult to study because the male bear's home range is about 200 square miles. They could be in Vermont, New Hampshire, or Quebec, and putting radio collars on them just wasn't feasible. So I decided to use trail cameras to monitor the male bears in my female home ranges to see what was going on. I would put a small amount of corn, 1 gallon of corn, in front of a monitoring camera. And normally in a 2-week period, I could get pictures of 8 or 10 different male bears in areas where there was a concentration of activity. In 2008, I set up in a clear cut that was about 16 years old at the end of its productivity for berries and ants, bees, and grubs. And I got my usual 8 or 10 different males. And in 2009, when I set up in that same clear cut, the males were gone. The only bear that I got was a resident female. But in 2008, I had an awful lot of pictures of 2 males in front of the camera at the same time. And this suggested friendships or coalitions. These two males were sharing that small amount of corn that one bear could have eaten easily. And these bears were not related to each other. I've done the DNA of all the bears in my study area. We collect hair samples with hair snares, which is barbed wire. And I found that the genetic relationship of the males, they're genetically unrelated. And so this suggests that the male strategy in order to access surplus foods inside the female home ranges is to form loose groups of unrelated friends to overpower the females to access that surplus food. And this is the first evidence of unrelated animals forming together as a group, something we do as humans all the time. Here we are right in this room acting as a group. With this type of complex social behavior, one would expect complex communication, and there is with the bears. In this picture, Squirty, my main bear, is opening and closing her mouth, extracting moist air from her lungs, lifting scent out of the air and drawing up through her olfactory system. One of the things I discovered in the bears was that an accessory organ to the vomeronasal system that allows her to identify airborne scent or light molecules. And bears, all of their long-range communication is done with scent, and they're the only mammal that I'm aware of that does this. All other mammals have long-range vocalizations. They also have a sensory nerve that comes down through the roof of the mouth, and they can hold leaves in their mouth to determine whether plants are edible or not. This is how I learned about this sensory organ. I noticed that all the cubs, every new piece of vegetation they came across, they'd hold in their mouth for a few seconds and release. At the end of the summer, I'd identified 125 different food items that they'd recognized and many, many more that they'd rejected. Bears have emotional expression, which is facial expression. This is honest expression. It's coming from their central nervous system. It's facial expression, the intensity of their vocalizations and actions. Any social mammal has to have some means of communicating honestly its mood, and we do that with facial expression. We have the most complex facial expressions of any mammal on Earth. We have over 3,000 muscles in our face devoted for facial expression. You wouldn't be comfortable in this room if you didn't know what the mood or emotional state of everybody else in this room was, and that's written on your face. Right now, you all have a passive look on your face, which I call subway face. It's what you experience with anybody anywhere in the world you go to get on a subway. This is Squirty after treeing a cub. She had an aggressive look on her face, and here she is with a happy face. They also have the expression of intention, and this is where they differ from other non-human animals. As humans, we have an emotional utterance that we manipulate with our lips, teeth, tongue, and larynx. So we can lie with our words, but the truth is read on our face. Bears, it's very, very similar. They have a very obvious emotional expression, and they also have an expression of intention. Other animals are thought to cry out with emotion, and others respond. Bears meet one-to-one and face off with strangers, and that's why I believe they developed this. And now they mechanically generate sounds and actions, so they chomp their teeth, they swat, they false charge, they huff, and so forth. And the meaning of these sounds and actions is based on the context of the situation. So if you meet a bear on a trail and she's got her cubs up a tree, she may false charge you, which means she lunges at you, expels a big blast of air. She wants to delay confrontation long enough for communication to take place. If you are walking out to a dumpster with a pail of food scraps, working at a restaurant, and a bear false charges you, he simply wants you to drop the pail of food scraps. So here's Squirty false charging. And here it is in slow motion, and I'm going to get kicked off the stage. And anyways, this time you just want to look at the expression of her face. She goes from... that's all right. Well, thank you very much.
Good.